In today's video, I'd like to offer a few thoughts on the 10 horns that we read about in Daniel and in Revelation. This has always been a fascinating topic, especially since the 10 horns will play such a pivotal role in end-time events. I'll also be covering this subject in a later installment of the video series about the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. However, in the meantime, I have a few quick thoughts about a growing trend around the world, one that is possibly related to the 10 horns. That growing trend is that we're seeing more and more politicians coming on the world scene who are willing to denigrate others, promote nationalistic policies, view the press as the enemy, and who have a casual relationship with the truth. In short, they are carbon copies of Trump. And indeed, many of these politicians are referred to as a version of Donald Trump, as their unorthodox approaches and backgrounds are so reminiscent of how Trump himself burst onto the political scene a few years back. In America, it's now a political strategy for conservative politicians to not only compliment Trump, but to emulate him as much as possible. Indeed, any Republican who doesn't bow down to Trump is at a political dead end. The GOP is now 100% the party of Trump. And around the world, we're seeing a similar phenomenon, as what can only be described as mini Trumps are popping up in one country after another. The latest example being Yoon Suk Yeol, the newly elected president of South Korea. Yoon Suk Yeol has actually been referred to as K-Trump because evidently anything major that comes out of South Korea nowadays must have a K in front of it. And he is far from the only world leader to have his name attached to that of Trump's. There is, of course, Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro, famously referred to as the Trump of the tropics, and we have France's Eric Zemmour, a far-right politician and TV personality looking to unseat Emmanuel Macron. Zemmour is referred to as France's version of Donald J. Trump. Beyond these mini-Trumps popping up in various countries, there are also a number of other controversial leaders and autocrats that seem to have an unusually friendly rapport with the former president. From Putin and Kim Jong-un to Erdogan of Turkey and Duterte of the Philippines, Trump treats them all with a respect and an admiration that was sorely lacking in his dealings with America's allies. Just a couple of months back, Trump endorsed Hungary's Viktor Orban for re-election, despite Orban's receiving substantial criticism for crackdowns on immigrants and journalists. Or perhaps those were the reasons for Trump's endorsement. Trump simply has a natural affinity for the strongman, the type of leader who has the power to do whatever he wants in his country. In fact, it's more than an affinity, it's jealousy. He admires this power and has often made remarks to this effect. And what we're seeing with all of these mini-Trumps around the world is that same tendency to lean far right and to embrace nationalistic, anti-immigrant, and anti-free press policies. It's as if they're all being made out of the same mold. All of this leads me to wonder if the 10 horns that show up in the last days will all be mini versions of the Antichrist, with similar traits and characteristics to the little horn himself. It will be, in effect, a mutual admiration society. Perhaps the 10 horns will be a mixture of these mini-Trumps we see in various countries, with a few of the autocrats Trump loves thrown in for good measure. Time will tell, but Trump does seem to be an archetype for these 10 kings. The references to the 10 horns are certainly plentiful in the Bible. The earliest is in Daniel 2, and its verses about the toes on King Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Although 10 toes aren't specifically mentioned, most Bible scholars believe them to be a reference to the 10 horns. Interestingly, in Daniel 7, the little horn comes up from the midst of 10 horns and evidently destroys 3 of them in the process. Since Daniel 2, verse 42 speaks of the toes being partly broken, perhaps this is a reference to how the Antichrist uproots 3 of the 10 horns. 2 of the more fascinating verses about the 10 horns come in Revelation 17, where verse 12 speaks of the 10 horns receiving power for 1 hour with the beast, and verse 16 talks about the 10 horns destroying Mystery Babylon. The challenging part to understanding the prophecy of the 10 horns is to get all of these events in the right order. If we take a look at all the references to the 10 horns as a whole, we come up with 6 distinct events. 1, the little horn rises up from among the 10 horns. 2, the little horn uproots 3 of the 10 horns. 3, the 10 horns give their power to the beast for 1 hour. 4, the 10 horns hate the whore. 5, the 10 horns destroy Mystery Babylon. 6, the 10 horns make war against the Lamb. So we see that the 10 horns are not only involved in the rise of the Antichrist and destroying Mystery Babylon, but they also remain to the very end, making war against Jesus at his return. These 10 kings, whoever they are, have a profound role in the last days. But the verse about the Antichrist uprooting 3 of the 10 horns seems to be a bit at odds with them giving their power to the beast for 1 hour. And why would the 10 horns destroy Mystery Babylon if the great whore is upon the beast just like they are? There is a common belief that the Antichrist hates the whore, and I admit that I used to subscribe to that idea as well. However, the more I study these verses, the more I am convinced that it's much more nuanced than that. In fact, Revelation 17:16 does not say that the Antichrist will hate the whore. The actual wording is this: "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire." The 10 horns being upon the beast and hating the whore to the point where they destroy her doesn't mean that the Antichrist himself will participate. After all, the Antichrist and the 10 horns are 2 different things. Furthermore, if we take these verses from the perspective that the destruction of Mystery Babylon is undertaken by the 10 horns only, and the Antichrist isn't directly involved, then the idea of the Antichrist rising up and uprooting 3 of the 10 horns makes more sense. I will be going more in-depth into looking at the identity of Mystery Babylon in a future video, but it is my belief that the city identified as Mystery Babylon is New York City, and that New York City at some point in the near future will be destroyed. I see 2 possible scenarios in which the 10 horns attack New York City, and both of them would result in the little horn rising up and returning to power. In one of these scenarios, the little horn simply takes advantage of the attack, and in the other, he is more complicit. In the first scenario, the 10 horns conspire to destroy the city in a terrorist attack. In response to this attack and the turmoil this would cause within the United States, the little horn finds a way to return to power and subsequently destroys 3 of the 10 horns. In this scenario, the little horn doesn't participate or plan the attack, but rather uses the events as a means to regain the power he craves. An added benefit is that the destruction of New York City makes many of his domestic legal problems disappear overnight. In a second scenario, the little horn is in allegiance with the 10 horns as they attack New York City. He wants this to happen, as it would make his domestic legal problems disappear, and he would also see it as a way to regain power. In this scenario, the little horn supports the attack on Mystery Babylon at first, but after he regains power, he betrays the 10 horns and launches devastating attacks of his own. The result is that the 10 horns are partially broken, as we read about the toes on King Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Some sort of peace treaty coming out of this attack could lead to the 10 horns giving their power over to the beast for the last few years of tribulation, or, at the very least, a reassessment of how nations view their alliances, resulting in a shocking New World Order. All of this is conjecture, so please don't take it as anything more than that. I am not predicting or prophesizing these events, but if we look at Trump's impending return to power and the rise of these mini Trumps all around the world, the emergence of the 10 horns could be imminent. America is already intensely divided for and against Trump, and the destruction of New York City under President Biden's watch could very well be the one shocking event that leads to the Antichrist returning to power and exacting revenge upon all who had opposed him. That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and if you care to leave a comment, please do. As always, please be respectful in any comment you leave, especially towards those with whom you disagree. I'll talk to you guys soon.